Well, first let me say it's an honor to be here and to be asked to be interim pastor, and I hope that I live up to the trust that you've placed in me. And I know that I will learn a great deal from you. Remember the Wizard of Oz? What a place to ask that question, right? Remember Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man? Remember the Emerald City? In the movie, as they're going down the yellow brick road, there's the Emerald City glowing greenly in the distance. But there's an episode that doesn't happen in the movie that happens in the book. See, they get to the edge of the Emerald City in the book, and the guards at the city gates tell them to put on these green glasses. And everybody is wearing emerald green glasses. And partway through the stay, Dorothy has the boldness to take the glasses off, and she discovers the city's not an emerald city after all. It's just like any other city. It's only because of the glasses that she's wearing that it appears to be emerald. So she confronts the Wizard of Oz with this discovery of hers, and he says, "Oh yes, and people who have lived here since I got here, they wear those green glasses so often, and in fact, all the time, so that once in a while when the glasses slip off their nose, they still think that the city is green." How do we see things? How do we understand God? What lens do we use to see the world around us? What are we looking through to make sense of the world in which we live? The story of the walk to Emmaus, as it is frequently referred to, is one of my favorite stories. It takes place on Easter afternoon. Two men who lived together in Emmaus. Emmaus is downhill from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is at the top, the crest of the mountain. And there are these roads that lead out in different directions to these various villages, Emmaus and Jericho and others. And these two men who are disciples of Jesus live together in Emmaus. They share this house, and they're on their way back to their home because they've been to Jerusalem, where, as we discover in the story, they've heard strange stories about Jesus rising from the dead, mostly from the women. And Luke tells us as they're walking along, they run into Jesus, but they don't recognize him. And he asks them what they're talking about, and they're like, "Well, duh. Are you the only person that hasn't heard about what happened over the weekend?" And they begin to explain, and he begins to respond to their doubt and their questions. And it says that he begins to open the scriptures to them. But they still don't understand, and they still don't recognize him. It's only when, after they've made this journey and they've had this conversation with the Jesus that they don't recognize, that they come into the house, they invite him in for dinner, and in good Jewish hospitality fashion, they invite him to bless the meal as the stranger, the guest. And it's when he takes the bread and the cup that they recognize him. And Luke tells us their eyes were opened, they recognized him, and he disappears from their sight. Fascinating story. When I was early on in my life as a Protestant minister, this one always kind of threw a loop for me because, you know, Protestant ministers are all about preaching, and so here's Jesus preaching to two disciples. You'd think they'd put two and two together and make sense of it, and they don't. When I became a Catholic priest, of course, I read this differently and said, well, see, they just needed the Eucharist. They just needed to sit down and eat and drink at the altar with Jesus. But then I discovered later, as I really started to allow this story to kind of sink in, it wasn't really the preaching. It wasn't even the bread. things that happen on that road and in that house. And what Jesus was modeling to the disciples and even how they responded to him. He was the model of hospitality, but then he was all during his ministry. He reached out to them as they were traveling down the road, trying to figure out what was going on, trying to deal with their grief and confusion. He shared with them and walked and talked and ate and drank, just as he had done for 3 years in his ministry. His life blended with theirs, and suddenly it all made sense. And think, too, of these two men who lived together in Emmaus. They welcome him as a travel companion. They share in conversation. They share their concerns freely. They listen to him even if they don't understand everything. They invite him in their house, and they ask him to bless their lives by blessing the food and drink. Their hospitality created the space for them to recognize Jesus in their midst. Hospitality, openness to the other, welcoming those who we encounter on the journey of life. I would suggest to you today that hospitality is a clue for following Christ, a key to Christian morality, real Christian morality, and a guide to recognizing the presence of Christ in our lives. First of all, hospitality, I think, is a clue to what it means to follow Christ. As I said, and if you stop and think about it, if you go back and you look at the Gospels and you take out the miracles and you take out the teaching, what is left? Jesus eating and drinking with people who are his friends and his enemies, people who are plotting against him, people who are listening to him, people who are desperate for a voice of hope. Being Christian is following Jesus. If who we are is what we imitate, then we need to remember that Jesus' life was one divine act of hospitality. God reaching out and welcoming us. A welcome that no church, no religious body, no government can stifle. If we are followers of Jesus rather than defenders of doctrine, shouldn't hospitality be one of the ways in which we understand what it means to follow Jesus? Secondly, hospitality, I think, is a key to developing a Christian ethic, to living Christian morality. The hospitality of Jesus is reflected in the hospitality given to him by the two who had known him all during his ministry and yet do not recognize him. Jesus was unrecognized. Think about that. These guys had been following Jesus for 3 years. But on this road, on this day, he was a stranger. He was the other. I think if you go back and look at all of the stories of Jesus appearing to his followers after the resurrection, there may be one where they recognize him. The rest of the time, he shows up and nobody knows who he is until he does something to reveal himself to them. He stands in the midst of the room full of apostles, and they don't know who he is until they see his wounds. He walks on the road with these two men, and they don't realize who he is until they've finished this conversation and this meal and this encounter. We live in a society that doesn't like the stranger, that doesn't know what to do with the other. We're always putting a variety of people in the other camp. Gays and lesbians, Muslims, poor people, African Americans, immigrants, you name it. We've got a whole list of others. Those people that our culture teaches us to keep at a distance. And many of us have experienced that in our own lives. In the last 2 weeks, at least 4 teenagers that we know of have committed suicide because of bullying and gay bashing incidents. Tyler Clementi, 18, at Rutgers University, a victim of cyberbullying. Billy Lucas, a 15-year-old from a little town in Indiana called Greensburg, who went out into the barn and hanged himself about a week ago. Asher Brown in Houston, Texas, 13, who was bullied at school because he was gay and because he was Buddhist. Seth Walsh, 13, of Tehachapi, California. And what's fascinating is, as television has begun to cover these incidents, and most Americans get all their news from television, we've seen discussions of the legal angle. What can these people be charged with? We've seen discussions of the psychological impact of the alleged heinous violations of privacy. But I've heard almost nothing about what it is afoot in our society that teaches people to behave in such violent, hateful ways. Very little conversation about this festering social ill that teaches people if someone is different, the best thing to do is get rid of them. In a nation that often likes to talk about being Christian, it's about the least Christian kind of behavior that there can be. It is a learned antisocial attitude towards people who happen to be different. It is a demonizing of the other. And it has helped to create a violent culture. There are welcoming and affirming congregations. I don't know if Tyler or Billy or Seth or Asher knew anything about those. There are lots of other ways in which people can find support if it's available. But for you and me, as followers of Jesus Christ, it seems to me that the hospitality which Christ offers everyone, including those at the margins of our society, needs to be modeled more boldly, more confidently. After all, in the first reading that we heard today, the first lesson, Paul is writing to Timothy, who's kind of down and not very confident, not sure where he's going to go next, and not sure of the direction of his ministry. And Paul says, I know you have a strong faith. I know that the Spirit that is given to all of us makes us strong, loving, and wise. We need that courage. We need that love. And we need that wisdom to live in the culture in which we find ourselves today. Thirdly, I think hospitality is obviously a guide to recognizing Jesus in our midst. As I said, think about all those post-resurrection narratives. How Jesus appears in rooms, how Jesus appears on the roadside, how Jesus appears in gardens. Even Mary on Easter morning doesn't recognize him until he calls her by name. There's something going on with the fact that all these Easter narratives have Jesus appearing as the other, the stranger. Just maybe, in our encounters with others, we find the opportunity to encounter God. Remember Dorothy? Back to her. She ends up in a strange land. She's told to go to the Emerald City. She strikes out on her own, and along the way she meets